So this is the sound of springtime.
Sometimes you have to be ready at a moment's notice. Spring comes on quite suddenly. Hunter came out to check out the vernal pool this morning, called Adam and I up and said we had to get down here because the frogs know it's spring, so we have to check it out.
So let's talk about vernal pools. Welcome to Ned Talks. Now, we've all probably heard of a wetland before. A wetland is an area that stays wet pretty much year-round, but there is another type of wet area that we can find in forests and riparian areas called a vernal pool or an ephemeral pool. Ephemeral means temporary, so these pools eventually dry up at some point or other in the year. But what happens is the spring rains and the snowmelt fills up these pools. So this pool was dry earlier in the summer, and as the temperature warms, it fills up, and then we get what we hear all around us: amphibians, salamanders, frogs, and even ducks and other animals coming down here to breed and reproduce before this pool dries up.
So some of the animals that rely on vernal pools are a variety of amphibians. So if you listen, some of the higher pitched kind of trills, those are going to be spring peepers. You have wood frogs, that's the lower pitched kind of croaky sound you hear. But you can also find some salamanders, specifically spotted salamanders is what we're in the hunt for right now. It might still be a little bit early for them, but we're starting to see the signs. And then of course you're going to have some other types of reptiles, birds. Wood ducks rely heavily on something like this. We have some wood duck boxes posted around the vernal pool that we're at right now. Things like snapping turtles love this kind of area. And what's great for all of these breeding amphibians is that there are not fish in vernal pools typically. You need a source, maybe a creek-fed vernal pool or a stream running into a vernal pool to get the fish into that waterway. So otherwise this is the perfect safe breeding ground for those amphibians. Wood frog egg masses often contain between 500 and 2,000 eggs, but they are often laid in communal masses, creating large, expansive egg masses that are easily spotted. The eggs develop for roughly 20 days, but this can be delayed in colder weather. The newly hatched tadpoles spend about 2 months in the larval stage, rapidly developing legs and absorbing their tail. They will emerge from their safe little pool as a juvenile frog, reaching full maturity at around 2 years.
So the males have these really big atrophied thumbs, and they only get them in the breeding season. And what that does is it helps them get a better grip on females when they're trying to mate with them. And so after the mating season, their thumbs go back to normal size. It's wild. Spotted salamanders, just like the wood frogs, will emerge from the ground once those warm spring rains hit and travel down to these pools to reproduce. The spotted salamanders lay egg masses of only about 50 to 250 eggs. And salamander eggs are a little different than the wood frog eggs. They're covered in a gelatinous mass that holds all the eggs together. And these spotted salamander egg masses are often cloudy in appearance. The spotted salamander egg masses will take anywhere from 2 to 3 months to hatch, depending on temperature, and then another 2 to 3 months to develop from the larval stage to the adult stage.
When you're hunting for some of these amphibians, you might want to turn over rocks and logs, which is great, that's how you're going to find them, but you always want to make sure you return the log or the rock to where it was. So if you flip something over, flip towards you, take a look, check it out, and then you want to return that spot to where you found it because that's ultimately the amphibian's home, right? And you wouldn't want somebody picking up your roof and just tossing it off. So make sure you always put anything you find out in a vernal pool back where you found it. Even though these kind of spaces are really, really cool, we do need to talk about the ethics of poking around somewhere like this. Like we've said, this is a prime breeding ground for some of the more delicate species. So it's not a good idea just to trudge out in the middle of a wetland or a vernal pool. There are precautions you have to take. As you can see, Hunter and I have these waders on, and we also sanitize these before we go into a new body of water, because without that, you might carry diseases or different kinds of parasites into a new waterway. Definitely want to avoid that. We also sanitize our hands before we handle any of these amphibians, because the amphibians soak up moisture directly through their skin. So anything that we have on our skin, things that we might not think are harmful, but things like lotion, hand sanitizer, perfumes, any kind of spray, that will ultimately end up in the amphibian system. So we need to sanitize before we touch any of these animals too.
Now, in talking about sanitizing your hands and equipment, there are a couple different things you can use, but whatever you're using, you want to make sure it's safe for the vernal pool and for the amphibians you're going to be handling. Particularly, I like chlorhexidine. It is a pretty easy chemical to use to sanitize and is pretty much harmless to vernal pools, but Northeast Park, Partners in Amphibian and Reptile Conservation, puts out a really good guide for decontamination procedure for equipment and hand washing, that sort of thing, and that can easily be found on the web. Since vernal pools are such a sensitive area, it's obviously always best to just watch from the shoreline and try to avoid getting into the water. But if you do happen to get into the water, again, like Emily mentioned, you just want to make sure you're taking proper sanitation into account to make sure these pools stay healthy. So as you can see, vernal pools are an incredible source of life, and it's really important that we keep them safe and protect them.
Thanks for discovering with us today. Happy spring. We should have gotten you some waders, Adam, so you could be out here.
Yeah, I love that.
NedTalks are made possible in part through the generosity of the Thelma and Harold Lenker Foundation.